would
Right.
introduce the non-specialist to what's studied in biblical studies up and down the country and across the world, which is generally not very well known outside specialist departments of theology.
Yes.
So that was the idea.
Yeah. By all accounts, it's been a huge success, and there's bridging this gap, or dare I call it a chasm, seems to exist between, if I can call it, an ivory tower. Not that you're in an ivory tower, but this perception that there's an ivory tower scholarly world, and then the masses and there seems to be little connection. I know you give lectures and so on, so you're trying to bridge this gap, but nevertheless remains a huge chasm, doesn't it, in learning from the general public?
It does. Yeah. And that's true even the people in the church, that they very often don't really know very much about the Bible. In fact, they honour it, they don't necessarily know it, and they don't know what's going on in the world of biblical studies any more than people outside the church do. So there's there is quite a gap or chasm. Yeah.
Yes, it's quite shocking. And well, one of there are a number of surprises, I think, in store for the reader of your book. And I just wanted to sample just a couple of them, really important ones, I think, that you highlight. As viewers may know, the New Testament contains four seemingly, I say seemingly because I don't want to prejudge the issue, four biographies, perceived to be biographies of Jesus: the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, which are traditionally assumed in the church for most of the last 2,000 years to be by actual disciples or friends of the apostles. So Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew, was assumed to be by the actual tax collector, who was a disciple of Jesus, of course. Luke, perhaps a companion of Paul, and Mark, not quite sure who he was, but nevertheless, perhaps closely associated with the Apostle Peter. So he's drawing on eyewitness accounts, apparently. And above all, John, the Gospel of John, is considered to be traditionally by the Apostle John himself. And it will come as a surprise to readers that, in fact, that's not been understood to be the historical facts at all for biblical scholars for over a century or more. And this is quite a surprise, I think, for many readers and listeners.
I think it is. People do tend to assume that the four evangelists, we call them, are apostles. Even though in the case of Mark, for example, he's not in the list of the 12 apostles in the Gospels, not even in the Gospel of Mark. And there's therefore no claim being made that he was an apostle. The other thing is that the titles of the Gospels only start to appear in the 2nd century. But we have texts and manuscripts of them, but they're only identified as according to Matthew, according to Mark, according to Luke, and so on, from the 2nd century onwards. So it's someone guessing who they might have been by, rather than there being a really solid tradition going back to the apostles themselves. And it's generally agreed by most people who've studied the matter that the Gospels aren't any earlier than about 70 AD. So they're therefore 20 or 30 years later than the letters of St. Paul, for example, which often comes as a surprise to people.
So these are not these Gospels. They're not written by eyewitnesses.
Just want to eyewitnesses, no. They are, I think you use the word biography, and I think one can call them biographies of Jesus. And Luke begins his gospel saying, there have been lots of accounts of the life of Jesus, and I've considered them all, and this is my distillation of them, which implies a reasonable time gap since the days of Jesus himself.
True. But what's also perhaps a surprise to many people in reading this book is that it's very widely accepted amongst historians, specialists, New Testament scholars, that some of the Gospels actually copy from another Gospel. So just to give the standard scenario, that the Gospel of Matthew and Luke used the Gospel of Mark in the writing of their own Gospel, plus they used other material commonly called Q and Quell in German, which I'm not going to go into perhaps, but because that's not my point. Is this, that what I found interesting is that Matthew and Luke not